Well, goodness, the game has changed. And I hope wherever you are, you're doing well at the climax of this tumultuous election season. I want you to know I have friends all over the ideological map, and I have a lot of friends who voted for Kamala Harris. And I have not been a guy who's been without criticism of Donald Trump. You know, I have my issues with him, both in his policies and especially with his antics. But I wanted to talk about some things just for those of my viewers and friends who might watch this who are Democrats or liberals or left-leaning people or even the woke people who have a hard time understanding why it is that Donald Trump won the election. And I'm going to try to say this kindly. I'm not your enemy. Out of time of filming this, it's late at night and I'm exhausted. Trump is clearly ahead. He's clearly the favored. This might be a historic election. And I'm seeing so many comments from people, they can't process why it is that Donald Trump would be so favored by so many people throughout the country, possibly even taking the popular vote. As of recording this, we'll see. You have three options. One is half the country are fascists. And that is really sort of the narrative that's been fed to us by, the Democrats and by a lot of the media, is that Donald Trump is a fascist, maybe a Nazi, and his supporters are un-American fascists. The other option is you could say Donald Trump is a fascist and a Nazi, but his followers, he just deceived over half the country, something like this. The third option, and I think the one that is true, and I'm not your enemy, is that you've been a bit misled. And I just want you to think about a few things. So I want to point out some things to you to try to help you see the other side of this. So I often try to put myself in the mind of people with whom I disagree and see things from their side. I've been in an ideological bubble at some point in my life when, you live in a small community and your friends are all in this little community and they all think sort of the same. You're at risk of having sort of, confirmation bias, of an echo chamber, of, the same speak, and you don't see the fuller picture of things. But then when you step outside of that bubble, you see, well, okay, not everyone thinks like this, and sometimes they have valid points, and sometimes the people in my crowd didn't have a full picture. I would like to politely suggest to you that that's what's happened on the left at this point. Why it seems so normal to you or liberal people is because it's supported by celebrities, the New York elites, the Hollywood elites, the music industry, and they sort of present this unified front of, sort of secular, ever more left-leaning culture. The Democrats have leaned into it, and the ideas that have influenced the left seem normal to people. And you might see, I live with a bunch of, rednecks in my community or whatever, but really normal culture is what I'm seeing from the late night shows and all this. The problem is, I don't say that you have to do this, but I spend a lot of time trying to see every perspective I can possibly see, from foreign news, Islamic sources, right-wing media, legacy media here, influencers, podcasters, right, left, center, and the game has changed. I mean, basically what has happened, and I'm not trying to preach at you, I just want to help you understand, is I've been around just long enough, been paying attention just long enough to see that what was considered liberal in the 90s or the 2000s, 2008, 2010, would now be considered almost center-right, right-wing. Jonathan Haidt did a study on this. When you have people who just sort of get in an echo chamber and talk amongst themselves, they come out of that chamber agreeing more confident in their beliefs, and they're not really opposed in intelligent conversation. This is what's happening. I think you've been misled. Just a couple things here. Is Donald Trump a fascist? And I want to just show you why he's not a fascist, why he's certainly not a Nazi. One is, if you think about what fascism is, it's not just a opinionated, sort of authoritative, very willful leader. That's not fascism. It can be bad, but it's not fascism. Fascism is a certain modernist movement that's a reaction against some of the more liberal movements coming out of the Enlightenment, right? There's variations on it. Very often, especially with Nazism, it's related to racial superiority, right? The master race for the Nazis. But in general, fascism has one thing I think in common, that is it's opposed to liberalism. And I don't mean that in the slang political sense. I mean in like the technical sense, the liberalism of that was behind the founding of this country, the United States. Belief in natural rights, of sort of a democratic republic, things like this. Constitutional government, these things that you associate with a traditionally liberal government. Fascism is sort of philosophically, ideologically opposed to this, right? So right off the bat, I don't have to go any further. Donald Trump is not opposed to liberal government in that sense. He's not opposed to a constitutional democratic republic, anything like this, right? And I think, if I'm being totally honest with you, this already shows he's not a fascist, but he's not only liberal in the technical sense, I think he's a bit of a social liberal. I don't think he's far right at all. In fact, I think if you look at the way he's lived his life, it's not exactly a conservative Christian lifestyle. And the things he's said on Howard Stern and all these TV shows for decades before I was born, he's a bit of a social liberal. And in fact, if anything, the Republican Party has become in some ways more conservative, but in some ways more liberal. He's sort of brought in a 90s, 2000s Democrat, big city liberal view of things into the Republican Party. You know, I am a convert to the Catholic Church, and I have a pretty conservative, philosophically view of things, more conservative than Donald Trump. And I've been called a lot of names for that, which is ridiculous. But he, you know, I have my problems with the fact that I'm watching the Republican Party, which I've never fully brought myself to be on board with, morph and become in some ways less conservative. But what that's done, and here's my second reason we know he's not a fascist or a Nazi, he has brought in the umbrella of the Republican Party is much wider now. It's become kind of mainstream.
But really does not matter. No matter who the Democratic nominee, I'm going to vote for Trump. And you want to know why? 2 reasons. I started to like Mr. Trump, and I am fed up with the Democratic Party.
So he's brought in Latino voters, black American voters, a lot of black men. I've watched video after video of black men so fed up with how far the Democratic Party has gone, and then feel like they've been used by it, and finding that their values and views and way of life aligns more with the current Republican Party, not because they're fascist. Jewish voters have sort of abandoned the Democratic Party. Orthodox Jews voting full synagogues worth for Donald Trump. This is not something you would see with a Nazi. Jews don't typically support Nazis. So my point here is the narrative that might be fed to you is that this is backwoods, ignorant, you know, right-wing Christian evangelicals and fundamentalists, which is already a bit of a slur, right, and a generalization. But it doesn't even make sense of the data or the people group supporting Trump. This shows that he's not a fascist. In fact, what he's saying is more mainstream. The umbrella is more welcoming to more amounts of people. People who have more liberal views of abortion or not typically Republican views of economics have come into the Republican Party under Trump. So why is that? And I want to be kind to you, but it's pretty simple. 2 categories of reasons. Essentially, Donald Trump is much superior to the alternative. The way I see this, and you might not see it this way, but I have seen the left go so far left that even left-leaning Democrats have become a bit appalled by it. I mean, Anna Kasparian over at the Young Turks was arguing with her co-part about using the late word fascist to label Donald Trump. This is clearly a lie.
I'm telling you what he's going to do. Believe him.
Internment camps?
Yes, he has talked internment camps. You know what, Jake? You may have to visit me in one. I get worried enough when he talks about what he's going to do to his political enemies.
Okay, on yesterday's episode of The Lead, Democratic Representative, of course, Debbie Dingell, told Jake Tapper that Trump was going to send her to an internment camp. But unfortunately, she's far from the only pundit and lawmaker who's panicked about the possibility of being thrown in prison or an internment camp should Donald Trump get elected for a second term.
This is the descent into fascism.
Am I losing my mind in feeling that this hyperbolic rhetoric is not helpful?
Yeah.
And the notion of a fascist. Because look, if we're just going to use fascist toward anyone we dislike, all right, then the word doesn't actually mean anything.
I'm not trying to be mean, but it's clear that some of the Democrats are openly just bold-faced lying for political gain, that's saying their political opponent is a fascist or a Nazi, and his supporters are un-American and fascist. This is slanderous. And then they have the nerve to say that he's divisive, which he can be, but without taking any sort of responsibility for the extremely slanderous, divisive things that they're saying, calling various people groups sort of supporting a fascist. So some of these liberals have become less comfortable in the furthest left extremes of the Democratic Party. And if you look at Kamala Harris as a person and as a candidate, beyond the narrative, beyond the sort of fluff, she presented herself as a very empathetic, polite, nice person. I'm not sure, I hate to be mean, but I think that was sort of crafted in meetings, that image. She might be a very nice person in some ways, but if you look at what she said over the years, she's really contradicted herself. She's probably one of the furthest left people that represents our country. For example, she did support a mandatory gun buyback program, and now she says, of course, no one's coming for your guns now that she tried to moderate. But do you see if anyone's been paying attention to this for any time at all, even if you're a moderate or even slightly left, a mandatory gun buyback program is not something that you're comfortable with. She said she was going to ban fracking. Now, I'm not getting into that, but my point is, that did cost her in Pennsylvania. I mean, this is a thing that they do in Pennsylvania, so even if you're a liberal-minded person, but your job and income and lifestyle economy is tied up in fracking, the fact that she said she wanted to ban it and get rid of it, and then walked it back when she wants your vote, is concerning. I hope you understand that. They lied openly about the border. I mean, I want you to think back. The narrative changed like 8 times. First of all, you were a racist if you didn't want quite so many people coming here, unchecked, unmitigated immigration from everywhere. Not just Mexico, I'm talking about from Nicaragua, various Hispanic countries, China, the Middle East, Europe. There was a Chinese national who voted illegal in one of our elections. We know this. This isn't hearsay. And if you said anything about this for a while, you were just a racist or a bad person. That again is divisive. And then they said it wasn't a problem. There's a caravan of people coming across the border. They said, no, there's no caravan. Well, then we had cell phone footage proving that there was a caravan. And then they said, well, yeah, there's a caravan, but it's not a problem if you think about it. He's just fear-mongering. And they go, okay, well, now it's a problem, but actually, we're actually the ones who are harder on the border. Because they change only when, after they called people in small towns in Arizona who are being overwhelmed by these massive amounts of people, they changed when the immigrants started showing up en masse in their cities. And then traditional voters who vote Democratic, black Americans in Chicago, were upset.
What about the people who have been here for the last 20 years?
We're complaining, saying, hey, this is not sustainable. The mayor of New York City said this is not sustainable. We can't continue. We have nowhere to put them. The school systems are overwhelmed. There's multiple language barriers. This is a problem, right? And then and only then did they realize you're not necessarily a racist if you have a problem with the excesses of the immigration system. And so they lied about it, changed the narrative, and then she acted like she was, actually, if you think about it, the one harder on the border. And Joe Biden actually funded part of the wall, or trying to rebuild the wall that he mocked Trump for building. If you've been paying attention to this, you see the just insane lies. So if you're a Democrat left-leaning friend, I hope you see where they lost a lot of people in the middle and even center-left. This is not just far-right people here. If anything, Again, not in every way, but in some ways the Republican Party has become more center, more liberal. And so to many people, myself included, for all my issues about Trump, it became an issue of, you have two parties. One is, and I hate the term, woke, and is in some ways anti-American, who is questioning the validity of the Constitution in New York Times articles, who is appeasing violence when it takes place on their side for months, burning down cities, people were killed, property damage galore, and they made light of it. Well, people have to live in these places. I had a friend who lived in one of the cities. He had to change his lifestyle a bit because of the potential of violence towards his family. Now, if that doesn't affect you, okay, but realize this is what people have had to go through. And at some point, the media and Hollywood and the Democratic Party can't hide it, because there's cell phone video, there's alternative media, there's podcasts, and the fact that eventually it just hits your real life. The Democratic Party, I think, post-Obama has been a catastrophic failure, if I'm just being honest with you. The pullout from Afghanistan was an unmitigated disaster. And if a Republican had been in at that point, they would have been ostracized, taken the full blame, and paid consequences for it. The economy has been overall very bad, and it's affected people's lives. Anytime they go to the grocery store or their kids turn 18 and try to leave the house, get a car, get an apartment, they're slapped in the face with this. You can only cover that up so much. And so this is just a reminder to people. Now, it's interesting to me, Obama actually, he blamed Bush for the economy, fair enough, when he took it, but the recovery was so slow. And I remember being pretty poor and, in a bit of financial despair when Obama came into office. And I thought, I don't know about this. Some of his stuff, still to this day, his economic stuff, some of it makes sense to me. But overall, I thought, I hope he can fix it. I'm in a bad place right now. I hope he can make it better. But it was such a slow recovery. When Donald Trump took office, within a year, the economy was just kicking. I mean, real wages were up against the cost of inflation. You can't argue, this is provable. The cost of things was leveling out instead of skyrocketing continuously. A lot of metrics showed the economy was good. Well, Obama took credit for it. He said, well, it's because of the work I did, not because of anything that Donald Trump did, that started immediately starting to affect in positive ways.
And the reason some people think, well, I don't know, I remember that economy when he first came in being pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good, because it was my economy. We had 75 straight months of job growth that I handed over to him. It wasn't something he did. I had spent 8 years cleaning up the mess that the Republicans had left me the last time. So just in case everybody has a hazy memory, he didn't do nothing.
And then when the economy crashed under COVID, because we shut down the economy, they blamed Donald Trump for it. And then the economy it's kind of sucked the last few years, and by most metrics, but not all. Well, they say, well, that's because of Trump's fault. And even though we've been in power for 12 out of the last 16 years, they always blame Republicans. Well, if you've been paying attention, and if you look into the statistics or the history of prices or anything like this, it's just not true. People notice this. And you can only hide it so much when they go to the grocery store and are struggling to buy groceries. So one of my complaints about Trump is that he has lived pretty immorally, I think. He's lived an immoral life, and I was shocked when people who, would have been very strict on me were just totally fine with it. They thought this guy was cool, I thought, you hold yourself or me or your friends to a higher standard, or you complain about Bill Clinton, but here you are with this guy. And I still think that Trump's, some of his lifestyle actions have been pretty moral. But here's the thing. I just want you to think about this. People did know that. He was on The View. He was going on Howard Stern. He was in the spotlight before I was born. Everyone knew he was a billionaire playboy type. And they all heard him on Howard Stern saying these crazy things that are distasteful. But no one really cared until he left their club. And then to add to that, the people that are still in the club are just as bad or worse. Howard Stern has said some pretty morally reprehensible, sickening things, and yet Kamala Harris went on the show. You know, I'm not trying to slander the man, but Bill Clinton is an abusive person. He's still campaigning for the Democrats. They're having celebrities on there that are on Diddy's short list, or Cardi B, who's not exactly a moral person. And the list goes on and on and on. My point is, to someone who's not in the bubble, this just reeks of hypocrisy, and you only care when you can use it as a weapon against your opponent. I was also old enough to see, for what it's worth, the way SNL, Will Ferrell on SNL, all this stuff basically implied, and a bunch of other people, that George W. Bush was an idiot. And they slandered the man. And Obama is clearly an intelligent man, and he's very articulate. But not every personality type is his type. But they slander George W. Bush. John McCain ran. They slandered John McCain, white supremacist. Mitt Romney ran, which is just a polite, old school liberal Republican type gentleman. Well, he's a sexist. They always attacked their character. This is a normal thing, and I can give you a lot of examples. Accusations of fascism, white supremacy, sexism, etc. I think people on the right, the old school Republicans, begin to feel like they can't win because it's not fair. And anytime the same things actually happen with figures on the left, it's not really dwelt on in the media or covered at all. But it's really dwelt on with this, leaving this bad taste in your mouth for a Republican figure. I think that's why when Trump came along, they no longer cared. By that point, it was done. So what I've noticed is the media figures like Don Lemon, they tend to feel like they are these victims in this political system. Donald Trump is this evil fascist beating down on the free press. But really, for being honest, they've been caught in so many lies, and I can be specific. Lies, not doing their due diligence, slandering people. Just as an example, the kid in Kentucky, this Catholic kid who came down to D.C. for a pro-life rally. And honestly, I jumped on the gun with the media, thought the kid was horrible. This Indian Native American man walked up to him, beat a drum in his face, and the image was young Nazi kid with a MAGA hat versus native minority, brave freedom fighter here. But then I watched the thing is, cell phone videos are on the internet. I watched like 2 hours of the video, and none of that was true. The kid, there's no reason to think he was a Nazi or a fascist or anything but just an excited teenage boy who didn't really do very much wrong. And yet the media ran with this for days and weeks, etc. The narrative was false. It fit their narrative. This discredits the media to people when you pay attention. And so it's not Trump's fault that the media has lost credibility with people. It's the media's fault. They need to own up to this responsibility, if it's even salvageable at all. What it's resulted in is we all have our own disconnected sources of information now, which is why I think there are still decent people, probably like you, who accept the narrative of the celebrities and the elites and the culture. And I'm not saying discard them, they're still people, but if you sort of uncritically accept the narrative that they hand to you, that's changing. Listen to people outside of your group. Look into the issues more. And sometimes you have to listen to sources, not disreputable sources, but people who don't agree with you to see a fuller picture. So for all the things Trump said that I don't like, almost the majority of the comments that they hound him on, they are absolutely knowingly, willingly taking them out of context to take the man down. They said he wanted to have Liz Cheney shot. I listened to the comments. He shouldn't have said it. That's not grade A Trump. That's just Trump being crude and brass and saying the things he says. But he had no intention of saying he wants her to be shot, or the press, or anyone else. And whoever perpetuated that knew that. They're just lying. And then take a look at, for all the things that we don't like about Trump, the narrative about him is false. Can you think of anything good that he did in his presidency? like the Abraham Accords, which should have gotten him some major award. He rebalanced the power in the Middle East, keeping Iran at bay. He should have got credit for that. Or establishing Space Force, which he got mocked for because of the name or the insignia. But people in government have been talking about that for years. We needed it. And he just, yeah, we just do it. I don't think he's without risks because he just does things, and sometimes he might do something wrong. But because he just does things, he got a lot done. A lot that both sides wanted, and he got very little credit for it. And on top of that, it seems to be obvious to me that some of our institutions and the left, and I'm not a big GOP guy. I don't want you to think I'm thinking that GOP is synonymous with Christianity. It's not. I just want you to see why people feel that you have an American party that's sort of like just returning to the norm, even though it's angrier. And then you have a party that's pretending to be returning to the norm, but is really extremely slanderous, corrupt, to the point where they set aside their own candidate undemocratically and uses lawfare to jail their political opponent in a way that's never been done in American history over nothing. They impeached him over something that was really just contrived. They said that they had evidence that he was colluding with Russia, our geopolitical enemy, for years. And I watched shit on all these guys on CNN for a long time, saying they had evidence of this. Well, then the report comes out, which I read, nothing, nada, zilch, nothing. So then, well, maybe he pushed back on our investigation too much. Well, I would have too, if you accused him unfairly and falsely for political reasons. He pushed back, yeah, well, you get what you get. And then the left will accuse him of stoking violence. Okay, I get that. His rhetoric is not good sometimes. But should they take responsibility at all for the violence on their side?
It shows the senator and his wife Kelly walking down the street as protesters gather near them, shouting and shoving police who are protecting them. Senator Rand Paul was reportedly leaving the area after attending the president's RNC nomination. In a tweet earlier this morning, he thanked.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome. The people are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you.
Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C. Not in the U.S.
And why is it that we haven't heard yet about the motivations of the two men that would be assassins, the failed assassins on Donald Trump's life? I'm pretty sure, God forbid anything happens to President Obama, but had something happened to him, if someone would have tried to have harmed him, I'm pretty sure that they would have found out the motivations and it would have been all over the news, especially had that person been a right-winger. But the many cases of violence on the left are glossed over, attenuated, it's not dwelt on. And at the end of the day, this is not just evangelicals or fundamentalists or bigots or rednecks or whatever it is you might think for Trump. This has become rather mainstream because I think people have left the furthest left elements of the Democratic Party and are realizing just how far that party's gone. Hence you have mainstream figures leaving that party. And this is why Kamala Harris lost. It's not fully her fault. I don't think she could have won, even though I don't think she ran the best campaign. She didn't distance herself from Biden enough. I don't think she had policies. She had concepts of policies, whereas Trump does have policies. And then she had the gall to act like the man is a Nazi, a fascist, and continue this divisiveness. And so once you see this man who's been attacked, his family's been attacked, he's been shot, he's been trying to run his campaign and do his job while defending himself in numerous court cases and investigations. And I have my issues with him, but I hope you see, to anyone who's not in this sort of bubble, you start to see this fuller picture. Okay, if I have my issues with Trump, whatever's going on the left is bad. I mean, it's just wickedly bad. I've tried to say these things in a way that's charitable. I don't consider you an enemy. I consider you a neighbor or a friend, but I hope you can start to think outside that box a little bit. Whatever happens in our country, I think it's changing. I think the parties are changing. The GOP is becoming, not traditionally economically Republican. Trump's a little unorthodox there with his tariffs, but also more socially liberal, but also a wider umbrella. But I think that's a reaction to the fact that the Democratic Party has already changed a lot, to the fact where it's unrecognizable to the Democratic Party that was in the 90s of Bill Clinton, or even of 2008 Barack Obama. If you don't believe me, just watch the 2020 Democratic primaries, in which they'd moved so far left since Obama's time that they began to throw him and Biden under the bus for being too right-wing. I think that should tell you something. Hey, whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you know that your life matters. Someone somewhere loves you very much. So please do take care of yourself. Remember that dark times pass and life's still worth living. I know you're busy. You're probably tired like I am. I'm exhausted. So as always, thanks for watching. God bless.